They say love is complicated, but for some women, it's not about love at all. It's about power. Behind every soft voice and tearful apology, there might be something ancient, cold, and calculated. She didn't choose you because she loved you. She chose you because you were useful, and when your usefulness expired, so did her affection. But here's the catch. Once she's done using you, she won't just leave. She'll turn the story around. Suddenly you were the problem. You were too much. You were never enough. This isn't romance. This is a quiet form of psychological warfare, wrapped in lipstick and compliments. Carl Jung didn't believe in fairy tales. He believed in masks, instincts, and projections. And in the female psyche, he saw something few dare to say out loud today: the terrifying effectiveness of manipulation without violence. So if you've ever been left confused, blamed, and broken by someone who once adored you, this video will show you why you thought it was love. She made you believe it, not through promises, but through presence. The way she looked at you when no one else did. The way she leaned in just a little closer when she laughed. The way she made you feel like you were the only man in the room. That wasn't love. That was strategy. For some women, not all, but enough to be dangerous. The real game isn't about affection, it's about control. Power dressed as romance. And here's what most men never understand until it's too late. You were never the prize. You were the fuel. Carl Jung believed that people rarely see others clearly. Instead, they project their inner world onto them. When you met her, you projected purity, softness, sweetness. But what if she was projecting too? Not love, not hope, but need. Need for admiration, need for control, need to feel powerful without ever looking powerful. A performance, not a connection. And here's where it begins. She sees you not for who you are, but for what she can extract from you. She studies you, listens closely, learns your weaknesses, your past wounds, your deepest longings. And then she becomes everything you've been searching for. If you're lonely, she'll be present. If you've been betrayed, she'll be loyal. If you're insecure, she'll admire you. She molds herself into your dream, but it's a temporary costume, not her nature. Once you're emotionally invested, once you stop seeing clearly and start needing her, the game shifts. The compliments slow down. The affection becomes selective. Your efforts are now measured. Suddenly, you're unsure if you're still the man she adored. You start chasing the feeling she gave you in the beginning, like a drug addict chasing the first high. She has you, not through force, not through arguments, through uncertainty. She gives you just enough to keep you chasing, then pulls back again. This is the power of psychological manipulation. You're not begging for her love. You're begging for the return of who she pretended to be, and this is where Jung's theory of the shadow comes in. He believed that people repress parts of themselves, the dark, manipulative, selfish parts, and wear a mask instead. But in intimate relationships, those shadows slip through. They leak into our actions, and for women who use this method, the mask is part of the trap. It's not accidental. It's designed. Here's what makes it so dangerous. While you're trying to be enough for her, you're losing pieces of yourself. Your self-worth begins to depend on her approval. Your emotional balance becomes tied to her mood, and worst of all, you start blaming yourself for her withdrawal. But let's be clear, this was never about love. It was about dominance. She doesn't want to connect. She wants to own your attention. She wants to be the center of your emotional world, even if she doesn't want to stay in it. And when she's done, when she's extracted all she can, she won't just leave. That's too honest. That would reveal the truth, that you were used. No, she'll twist the narrative. She'll say you changed, that you were too intense, too jealous, too distant, too emotional. She'll flip the script so convincingly that even you might believe it. This is the final stage of the cycle, blame. Blame cleanses her hands. It restores her image. She walks away with her reputation intact, her victim card in hand, and the next man already lined up. Meanwhile, you're left in emotional pieces, trying to understand how someone who seemed so warm could become so cold, so fast, and if you try to explain it to others, you'll sound bitter, like you're exaggerating, because no one sees the manipulation. They only see the image she carefully crafted. This is not about hate toward women. It's about awareness of patterns, the ones no one wants to talk about because they challenge our illusions. Jung said that what we don't make conscious will rule our lives. And the truth is, most men have never made this pattern conscious. They repeat it. They fall for it again and again. She uses, she leaves, she blames, and you try to become better for the next one. But what if the solution isn't becoming better, but becoming aware, to understand that not all love is real, that not all affection is pure, that sometimes the game is played with a smile and the damage is done without a single raised voice. She didn't fall out of love, she fell out of need. And once she no longer needed you, she rewrote the story so she could walk away without guilt. Let that sink in. It never happens overnight. The moment she stops admiring you, the moment she stops asking how your day was, the moment she starts looking through you instead of at you. It's never loud and it's never dramatic, at least not in the beginning. The shift is subtle, and that's exactly why it's so effective. Most men don't notice it right away. In fact, they often blame themselves for it. They think they've done something wrong. Maybe they've become less attractive, less ambitious, less interesting. They start adjusting, apologizing, chasing. They think they're fixing the relationship. What they don't realize is that the shift isn't a reaction, it's a decision. Carl Jung wrote about how the unconscious manipulates our relationships when we remain unaware of our own patterns. For some women, especially those driven by deep-seated insecurity or a need for psychological control, the shift from affection to distance is not just emotional fatigue. It's a calculated move in an internal strategy. When she begins to withdraw, she is not confused. She is testing your response, testing your dependence, testing how far you'll go to win her back. Because in that moment, the power dynamic flips. In the beginning, she chased your attention. Now she wants you to chase her validation. And every time you reach for it, whether with a gift, a compliment, or emotional availability, you reinforce her control. You confirm to her that she no longer needs to give to receive. She can simply be absent, cold, detached, and you'll still pursue. This is where it becomes dangerous. Because now you're not trying to build a relationship. You're trying to restore a version of her that never really existed. You're trying to bring back the woman who admired you, respected you, maybe even adored you. But that version of her was likely a temporary construction, a hook, not a foundation. And she knows it. When she pulls away, she creates confusion. She creates longing. You start remembering the early days, the idealized version of what you had, and you become emotionally invested in fixing something that's already being dismantled. Not by accident, by design. Jung believed that every unconscious action seeks balance. For a woman who needs emotional leverage, this withdrawal isn't just self-protection. It's a psychological maneuver. It puts her in control of your emotional state without needing to say a word. And when you question her, she'll respond with something vague. I just need space. You're being too much, or I don't feel the same anymore. Notice the pattern. The blame begins to creep in slowly, wrapped in emotional ambiguity. And what do? You try harder. You become more vulnerable, more expressive, more attentive. You think you're repairing the connection, but you're actually deepening the imbalance. She is not matching your effort. She's monitoring it, and every effort you make becomes evidence to her. You want her more than she wants you. That's the real currency she was looking for. Now she can rewrite the narrative. You're no longer equal partners. You're the emotional pursuer, and she's the reluctant queen. Distant, complex, hard to read. If you get frustrated, she says you're unstable. If you give space, she says you're cold. If you ask for clarity, she says you're pressuring her. No matter what you do, the goalposts keep moving. And the more confused you get, the more control she gains. This is where the concept of using and blaming really solidifies. Because, from her perspective, she's never the aggressor. She didn't yell, she didn't cheat, she didn't leave you, she simply changed. The story becomes, you were too intense, too emotional, too insecure. And when you finally confront the situation, or worse, break down from exhaustion, she steps out as the composed one, the one who tried, the one who gave her best. But let's be honest, this wasn't a slow decay of passion, this was a shift in power. The affection was always conditional. The kindness had an expiration date, and the moment she realized you were emotionally hooked, she no longer needed to invest in the illusion. You were not loved. You were tolerated, observed, and eventually discarded in a way that preserved her image, and the world will believe her because she'll never say anything cruel. She won't slander you. She doesn't need to. Her silence, her distance, her vague language, all of it serves to frame you as the one who fell apart while she stayed calm. It's a perfect psychological setup. You feel like the one who failed while she walks away with no visible scars. Carl Jung would call this an unconscious projection of her shadow, the part of herself she refuses to see. Her need for control, her avoidance of accountability, her emotional detachment, all pushed onto you. You become the stand-in for her own unresolved inner conflict. And unless you've done deep self-work, you'll carry that blame like a weight you think you earned. But here's the truth. Her withdrawal wasn't a mystery. It was a method. The shift was not emotional confusion, it was emotional calibration, a test to see just how much you were willing to give while she gave nothing, and most men, unaware of the dynamic, give everything. Perchance, you fall for her. It feels like destiny, like something meaningful is finally unfolding. She listens to you in a way no one ever did. She mirrors your values, your vision, your emotional wounds. You feel seen, deeply seen. But here's the painful reality. You're not seen. You're scanned, assessed, categorized. Because for some women, particularly those who live through control, validation, or power, relationships are not an expression of love. They're a system of acquisition, a psychological marketplace. And in that marketplace, you're not a soul. You're a function, a resource, a role, something that can be extracted, then dismissed. Carl Jung argued that what is unconscious in us governs our lives without our consent, and in this case, the unconscious motive isn't intimacy, it's positioning. She doesn't fall in love with you, she falls in love with what being with you allows her to feel, elevated, desired, in control, envied, reassured, rescued. But these aren't lasting emotional bonds, they're passing psychological satisfactions. And once she's full, she'll stop feeding you the illusion of connection. Here's what most men don't see until it's too late. They weren't chosen for who they are, but for how well they fit the script. The woman in question doesn't want to meet you in your depth. She wants to cast you in her drama. And every word you say, every flaw you reveal, every confession you make is quietly stored and evaluated. Will this man play the part the way I need him to? That part may be the provider, the healer, the protector, the status boost, the emotional sponge, or even the temporary savior. It doesn't matter which. The logic is always the same. If you fit, you stay. If you resist, question, or stop performing, you're replaced. This is where projection becomes lethal. She sees not your individuality, but an image she's created based on her own needs and fears. And if you ever step outside of that image, by showing real emotions, by setting boundaries, by asking for reciprocity, you disrupt the fantasy. You become a burden, an annoyance, a threat to the emotional control she worked so hard to maintain. At first, she might try to correct you, gently, subtly. She'll use charm, softness, even guilt to get you back in character. But if that fails, she'll escalate. The warmth disappears. The criticism starts. You'll hear that you've changed, that you've become selfish, cold, or demanding. But you haven't changed. You've simply stopped being a mirror for her illusions. This is the exact moment many men start to collapse. They try harder. They bend over backward. They attempt to become again the version of themselves that was admired. But what they don't realize is that they were never truly admired. They were simply filling a temporary need. Now that the need has shifted or vanished, so has the affection. What happens next is perhaps the most psychologically violent part of the process. She dehumanizes you without saying it, not through cruelty, but through absence. You become invisible emotionally and mentally. She stops responding with energy. She stops initiating. She starts speaking to you like a stranger, detached, cold, efficient. And if you ask her what's wrong, she'll say, nothing. But everything is wrong. What was once connection is now transaction, and the more you try to revive it, the more suffocated she seems. Not because you're overwhelming, but because you're interfering with her silent exit plan. At this point, if you still haven't realized what's happening, she'll make sure you do, indirectly. She'll start planting emotional landmines, bringing up your flaws at the worst moments, comparing you to others, withholding affection while expecting emotional labor. She'll speak more about how she feels unfulfilled or unseen, while ignoring your attempts to engage. It's a performance designed for one purpose: to justify her upcoming escape. She needs a reason to exit without looking like the one who walked away, so she constructs a psychological narrative where you failed her, not in truth, but in perception. This is what Jung called the disowning of the shadow. She cannot acknowledge her own withdrawal, her own emotional manipulation, her own use of you as a means to an end. So she assigns those traits to you. Suddenly, you're the cold one. You're the one who stopped trying. You're the problem. The genius of this tactic lies in its invisibility, because it doesn't happen with screaming or chaos. It happens in the subtle twisting of memory, the quiet rewriting of history. And once it's rewritten, she tells the story to her friends, to herself, maybe even to the next man. You, the man who tried, becomes the man who failed. You, the one who gave, becomes the one who took. And she becomes the misunderstood woman who just couldn't take it anymore. But let's be honest, she could take it. She just didn't need it anymore, because you had served your purpose. The emotional supply chain was dry, and now it's time for a new role, a new man, a new story. The worst part: you walk away thinking you were never enough, when in truth, you were simply never meant to be more than a chapter. That was the plan all along. And here's the core pain most men don't admit out loud. It wasn't that she left, it's that she made you believe it was your fault. That if you had just loved her better, listened more, done less, tried harder, she would have stayed. But that's the final layer of the manipulation. She was never there to stay. She was there to collect, to consume, to experience something through you. Admiration, elevation, distraction, and then move on when the experience was no longer stimulating. Jung warned that people project their inner wounds onto others as a way to avoid seeing themselves. And for women who operate through emotional manipulation, relationships aren't about growth. They're about escape, escaping their own hollowness, insecurities, unresolved childhood traumas. And you're the tool, the emotional elevator that helps them rise temporarily. When you stop lifting, you're discarded. And worse, you're blamed for the fall. So what now? The mistake would be to harden, to hate, to generalize. That's not awareness, that's trauma. The true solution is to recognize the pattern before it repeats, to understand that not every woman is this way, but those who leave deep wounds that don't heal with logic. They heal with truth. The truth that you were not broken, you were used. The truth that you were not loved, you were leveraged. The truth that you were not seen, you were projected upon. And once you see that clearly, truly clearly, the manipulation no longer works. You stop chasing ghosts. You stop blaming yourself. You stop trying to resurrect the version of her that never really existed, because now you know. She didn't want you. She wanted the role you played, and when the role ended, so did the illusion. Let it end. One of the most disorienting experiences for a man in a toxic dynamic is realizing that the person causing the emotional harm is the very same person who continues to appear kind, gentle, and innocent to everyone around her. It creates a cognitive dissonance so powerful that many men spend months or even years trying to reconcile two conflicting truths. How someone who once made them feel so loved could also make them feel so broken. This confusion is not accidental. It is engineered, consciously or not, by a woman who has mastered the art of emotional damage without responsibility. Carl Jung understood that the psyche creates masks, what he called personas, to hide the darker, unconscious parts of ourselves. For many women, especially those whose self-worth is built on external validation and moral superiority, the persona is crafted not just to please others, but to protect a carefully maintained image. The image of the good woman, the nurturing partner, the one who only wanted the best. But behind that mask often lies another force, the instinct not to connect but to control without appearing to. What makes this type of manipulation so potent is that it's rarely aggressive. It doesn't involve overt cruelty, shouting, or violence. Instead, it manifests as a slow erosion of your self-esteem. It shows up in withdrawal of affection, in double standards that she'll never admit, in a coldness you're not allowed to name without being labeled too sensitive. She begins by pulling back slightly, less warmth, less support, fewer questions about how you feel. Then she introduces ambiguity, vague statements about not knowing how she feels, inconsistent behavior, mixed signals. Eventually, you find yourself emotionally starving while still being told that everything is fine. You're caught in a trap. If you say nothing, the situation continues. If you speak up, she claims you're being dramatic or insecure. If you become distant in response, she paints you as emotionally unavailable. Every path leads to her moral high ground. You become the villain by default, and she remains untouched. The brilliance of this dynamic is that she never gets her hands dirty. She doesn't lie outright. She doesn't cheat. She doesn't insult. She simply creates a pattern of emotional inconsistency that leaves you questioning your own sanity. And while you're busy trying to understand what's happening, she's already moved to the next phase, external validation. She begins reshaping the narrative outside the relationship. She tells friends that she's concerned about your behavior, that you've become distant or unstable, that she's trying her best. She uses soft language, passive statements, and subtle expressions of victimhood. People believe her. Why wouldn't they? She seems calm, measured, compassionate. Meanwhile, you're unraveling privately, trying to hold together something that only you are still fighting for. This is the most devastating part of the blame cycle, because now, not only have you been emotionally abandoned, but the world is being prepared to see her as the one who suffered. And when the final rupture happens, when the relationship ends, she leaves with her reputation intact. You, on the other hand, are left with not only heartbreak, but also public perception working against you. You might be tempted to tell your side of the story. You might want to scream the truth, but you know how that will look. You'll seem bitter, childish, obsessed. She doesn't need to defend herself. Her silence makes her look dignified. Jung would call this a projection of her shadow, the dark, manipulative parts of herself that she refuses to see. She cannot accept that she used you emotionally, that she pulled you close to feed on your energy and discarded you when you became inconvenient. So she displaces that blame. You become her shadow. She casts onto you all the selfishness, coldness, and confusion that actually belonged to her. And because you were emotionally open, because you loved her sincerely, you absorb it. You start to believe it. That's the true power of this kind of emotional damage. It doesn't just hurt you, it rewrites you. It changes how you see yourself. You become quieter, less trusting, more doubtful of your own worth. You second-guess every instinct. You replay every conversation. You start to wonder if you are the one who caused everything to fall apart. And in doing so, you carry the emotional debt of a relationship where she walked away with clean hands. But those hands weren't clean. They were just clever. She did what many emotionally manipulative people do best: harm without evidence. Her control didn't look like domination, it looked like withdrawal. Her criticism didn't sound like anger, it sounded like confusion. Her rejection didn't come with clarity, it came with ambiguity. This is not just emotional immaturity, this is emotional stealth. And the damage it causes is often more profound than open conflict because it denies you the right to even name what's happening. And here's where the cycle continues. Because once she has secured her innocence, she moves on, quickly, effortlessly. She reinvents herself in a new dynamic, with someone new to impress, someone new to admire her softness and sweetness. Meanwhile, you're left trying to piece yourself back together. You carry not only heartbreak, but also confusion, shame, and silence. You become afraid to open up again, afraid to trust, afraid that any vulnerability will be weaponized. This is the long-term cost of emotional abuse, disguised as innocence. It doesn't just break your heart, it distorts your inner compass. And unless you bring this entire pattern into the light, you'll repeat it. You'll fall for the same persona again in a different body. You'll mistake attention for affection. You'll confuse interest with safety. And each time it happens, your sense of self becomes smaller. Carl Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What happened with her was not fate. It was a pattern, a precise psychological sequence that can be understood, unmasked, and avoided. But only if you stop chasing the illusion that she was ever who you thought she was. Only if you accept that her kindness was a performance, that her empathy was conditional, that her silence was strategy, not sadness. You don't need to hate her, but you do need to stop protecting her in your mind, because as long as you keep telling yourself that she didn't mean to hurt you, that she was just confused, that you could have done more, you are protecting her image at the cost of your own healing. The truth is, she was never confused. She was careful. She knew how to appear innocent while keeping control. She knew how to create distance without confrontation. She knew how to position herself as the victim in every scenario. And she knew how to leave you with the pain and the blame. Once you accept this truth, the fog lifts. You stop obsessing over closure. You stop needing her to acknowledge the damage. You stop waiting for the apology that will never come, because now you understand. The person she showed you in the beginning wasn't real. It was a mask. And once you stopped serving the image she wanted to reflect, she removed it. The healing begins when you stop chasing the mask and start rebuilding the man behind the wound. She never wanted to destroy you, because that would require acknowledging your value. She simply wanted what she could take from you without giving too much of herself. And once you stopped being useful, she needed you gone, but not as a man with dignity, as a mistake, as a lesson she had to learn. That way she could leave without guilt and still wear the crown of the misunderstood woman who tried her best. But now you know. You were not broken. You were studied. You were not loved. You were consumed. And when the performance ended, she rewrote the entire script, with you as the villain and herself as the innocent. Carl Jung taught that freedom begins the moment we stop lying to ourselves. So stop pretending she didn't know what she was doing. Stop calling manipulation confusion. Stop calling betrayal closure. And stop calling survival love, because when you finally see the game, you stop playing it. And that's the moment you reclaim the one thing she could never fully control, your awareness. You don't need revenge. You don't need her back. You don't even need her apology. You just need to stop making excuses for the woman who watched you fall and called it growth.